Hello, and welcome to the PanSIG Journal Peer Review Training Session. The editorial team would like to thank you for your time and effort in supporting the review process. Your evaluations help to maintain the journal's high standards and ensure valuable, evidence-based content for educators. Your insights improve submissions and promote the spread of innovating teaching strategies. Now, in this process, you'll be evaluating practice-based academic papers. The review form that you can see on the screen now consists of several sections that address important aspects of the teaching practice described in the manuscript, and each section should be carefully considered, and your feedback should be constructive, specific, and actionable. And after completing the review, you'll cross-check your feedback with a rubric. And this rubric will also help to maintain consistency in the review process, ensuring that all reviewers adhere to the same high standards of evaluation. Now, let's take a very quick look at the review form. And then after that, we'll examine the rubric to get an idea of what types of comments we're looking for. So here we are with the actual review form. We've got 5 sections for the practice articles, and each of the sections will be evaluated on either a 1, not achieved, a 2, somewhat achieved, or 3, fully achieved, with your comment. And then over here in the right column, that will be used by the author to confirm and then to give specific details on how those requested changes have been made. So please do not be concerned with this right column. Now, let's look at the sections that we'll be exploring further in today's information video. So we've got the rationale, we've got the topic with a couple subtopics, we've got the theoretical framework, implementation, and finally, we've got reflections and insights. Okay, let's come back to this review form a little bit later. Let's take a few minutes to examine the rubric for evaluating reviews. Now, we, the editorial team, will be using this rubric to evaluate the reviews. So please make sure that your review matches the criteria described in this rubric. Now, our goal, our aim is to reach this preferred zone for all of the different types of comments. So let's take a look at the first section here. Let's ensure that the scores that you actually give to the different sections are reflected in your comments. Okay, so for example, something that would be considered unacceptable would be that the review form sections with low scores or high scores don't have any specific comments at all. Okay, so please make sure that all of the sections in the review form have comments and scoring. So an acceptable version would be that most submission review form sections with low scores have some form of a specific comment. For example, it seems that there are several ideas you're using that require citations, but the preferred type of comments and scoring would be for both the low, mid, and high points having comments. So you can take a look at these. For a comment that you give 1 point to, it seems that there are several ideas you're using that require citations. And even for something an author did very well, you gave a perfect score of 3 points to, you can still give positive feedback. For example, it was really helpful how you followed up some abstract concepts like, and here you can give XYZ or XYZ with a specific quote or section from their paper with concrete examples. Okay, now moving on to concrete examples, is you have used concrete examples to support statements. So please do not use blanket statements like this was poorly written or this is excellent. Okay, and please read this on your own. We're getting up to the preferred type of concrete example would be using direct quotes to support statements. Okay, so for example, you have written in your comment, in your methods section, so you're here describing specifically with a concrete example where what you're analyzing, you wrote, the data was then statistically analyzed, but you didn't write how. Okay, so then the author can go to that methods section. They can see exactly what is missing or lacking. Okay, another example would be in your methods section, the data was analyzed by, and then, again, these two are examples taken directly from the paper, and they clearly showed the reader how you did your analysis. Okay, next, actionable comments. So something that we would hope you do not write is the writing needs to be improved. Okay, again, it's not clear to the author what kind of action needs to be taken. So we're looking for comments that clearly specify the problems and possible solutions. For example, many language teachers will have difficulty understanding this idea. How about first defining what blah blah is and describing how it relates to language teaching? Okay, moving on to logical progression of your comments. So for example, I liked your discussion section, but your introduction was unclear. So obviously the introduction comes before the discussion section. So please list those things chronologically. The type of comment we're looking for here, the specific comments that are organized by section of paper and grouped by type. So for example, you start off with in your introduction, the structure is clear, but the argument could be stronger. And then chronologically, little by little, you move down to the methodology section. Okay, the statistical analysis is unclear. So please ensure that your comments reflect logical progression. Now, finally, the tone of your comments. Remember that the PanSIG journal is especially a starting ground for a lot of new authors. So please be aware that some of the authors, this might be their first attempt at a publication. So let's try to be as constructive as possible and also compassionate, helping the author to want to improve their paper. So please avoid comments like, this section is poorly written and confusing, okay? That tone is quite aggressive, quite terse. It sounds negative. It doesn't give any kind of constructive advice. And let's try to veer towards comments that focus on how to improve and are also compassionate. Okay, so we want to help maintain the author's motivation to not only take on revisions, but also to continue researching and publishing. So a comment that would be more along this type of line would be, this section will be stronger with clearer examples. You've done a good job laying the groundwork, so just a bit more clarity will make it excellent. Okay, so once you've completed your review, please double back onto this rubric and just confirm that your comments, your scoring are in this preferred zone. Okay, now let's move on to the actual review form. Now, this here is what the review form that you will receive will look like. Okay, and again, you'll write your comments here and the author will be able to address your comments on this right side column. Now, what we have done is we have filled out a review form to give you some examples of feedback that you can provide to the authors. Okay, and we've marked in as well the achievement level. Okay, so for example, if we take a look at the first section of your comments. Now, another thing that's very important here is please avoid any feedback on the formatting of the paper, on the language, or on the style. Okay, the editorial team will be in charge of doing that. Your task is to check the content through the criteria that we're going to review from now. Okay, so let's take a look at the first part, rationale. So here, in the rationale, what exactly are you evaluating? Well, the article should clearly define the teaching methodology or the strategy, and it should also explain its importance within the context of ESL or education. And some questions that you can ask yourself are, let's just make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it, even on a small screen. So some questions that you can ask yourself are, is the methodology or the teaching strategy well defined? Is it clearly explained? Also, does the author explain why this methodology is important for addressing current challenges in ESL, EFL, or education? And has the methodology actually been tried and tested in a classroom setting? So, for example, the paper is not simply a review of literature, okay? And we'll talk a little more about that in greater detail in one of the following sections. So, how to provide feedback. So, a poor example of feedback would be the rationale isn't clear, okay? So, we've already covered that in the rubric. Nothing specific has been addressed. So let's take a look at a good example of feedback. So perhaps the author has not fully achieved this part of their paper. So you've given them a 1, and your comment is the rationale needs further explanation. While the teaching strategy is outlined, it would be helpful to explain why this approach is particularly important in addressing, and you can note the specific challenge that that the paper is addressing in ESL or EFL classrooms. Okay, and next, let's move on to section B, topic. Now, what are you evaluating here? Well, this is the relevance and the novelty of the teaching practice or methodology to current trends and challenges in education or ESL, EFL practice. And some questions that you can ask yourself for this section are, 1, is the teaching practice or teaching methodology relevant to the journal's audience? Also, does it present a novel or innovative contribution that other educators can implement? And an example of poor feedback might be something to the effect of, this topic isn't relevant. And we're looking more towards getting feedback that is something like this. The topic is timely, but could benefit from a stronger connection to recent trends in digital language teaching. Okay, so maybe this paper is exploring online teaching or digital teaching, expanding on how this practice aligns with recent challenges in online ESL instruction would increase its relevance. Okay, so you've given this author a 2, so it hasn't been poorly done. It's been done, but just not as well as it could be. So you've given them some very constructive feedback here on how to improve it. Now, the next section, the article presents a novel or innovative, meaningful contribution. And again, maybe they've just missed out a little bit on fulfilling that category. And your feedback includes, while the methodology is interesting, it could be made more applicable to a wider audience by discussing how it can be adapted to different ESL contexts. Okay, and then you could even perhaps outline the context. Now, the next section, theoretical framework. What are you evaluating here? Well, we're looking at the appropriateness of the framework and its connection to the practice that's being described. And some questions that you could ask yourself for this section are, does the article provide an appropriate theoretical framework to support the practice? And is the framework adequately connected to the teaching practice? Also, does the article compare similar practices and highlight how this methodology helps close educational gaps? And finally, is the literature both reliable and timely. Okay, so let's look at some specific comments. So, for example, in this section on theoretical framework, the article provides an appropriate theoretical or pedagogical framework and adequately connects it to the practice being described. Well, maybe the author here hasn't done an adequate job of doing it. You've given them a score of 1, and your feedback states the theoretical framework is mentioned, but not fully developed or not developed. It would strengthen the paper to compare this methodology with similar approaches in the literature and explain how it fills a gap in current practice. Okay, and moving on, the next section. The theoretical framework compares similar practices and highlights how the methodology or strategy provides an opportunity to close educational gaps. And so we've forgotten here to assign a score. So let's take a look at the comment. The connection between the theoretical framework and the teaching practice needs clarification. Okay, so I would say that's probably a 2. It needs clarification. So maybe the framework and the practice have been outlined, but it's not clear how they connect. Okay. Next, literature used for support is from reliable sources. For example, the articles have been peer-reviewed and it's contextualized adequately. Now here, the author's done a great job. And our comment is you've used a good variety of reliable and interesting sources from the past and current authors or researchers. Okay, and another comment, literature cited include recent work. Now, I would say recent within the past 10 to 15 years. You don't want to have a paper where all their citations are from 40 to 50 years ago, okay? Of course, a lot of the older research is very pertinent still and, very widely used and respected. So, of course, that's wonderful, but there should be some more recent work cited. So here, your comment would be including more recent literature would provide a stronger foundation for the method described. All right, let's move on to the implementation section. Now, with implementation, what are you evaluating here? Clarity in describing the participants, their level, the educational context, and the steps of the teaching practice that ensure replicability. Now, please note here, in order for a paper to be considered for publication in the PanSIG journal, the practice-based submissions must reflect actual classroom practices or interventions that have been implemented and evaluated. So that means that authors are required to present evidence of having trialed their approach in a real-world educational setting. That also includes any relevant outcomes or reflections that the author has made. Now, submissions that are purely theoretical or hypothetical or resemble literature reviews without demonstrating the actual practice do not meet our publication criteria. So we're going to emphasize that the goal of practice-based articles is to share insights and results from direct experience in the classroom. So if the author has not done that, then that alone is grounds for not being accepted. So please very carefully ensure that the teacher has actually trialed what they are stating in their classroom and come to some type of observation and conclusions. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the feedback here for implementation. In this section here, the article clearly describes the participants, their level, and the educational context in which let's change that to in which the teaching practice is implemented has not been done. So the comment is the participants' level and educational context, are not fully described. Providing more details about the learners' backgrounds and the classroom setting would help readers to understand how the practice can best be applied. Okay, the next section, steps of the teaching practice or strategy are clearly described, easy to follow, provide enough details to make it replicable by other educators. Here, the author has perfectly fulfilled that criteria. Implementation is thorough with detailed steps that make the practice easy to replicate. The descriptions of the participants and educational context are clear, and the materials used are well documented. The clarity in outlining the process ensures that other educators can follow and apply the methodology with confidence. Okay, and if we look at the two next sections, materials, resources, tools, etc., are clearly outlined. Okay, the author has somewhat fulfilled that criteria, and the comment is the methodology steps are somewhat vague, including more detailed description of the tools used, such as specific lesson plans or digital resources, would make the practice easier to replicate in different contexts. And finally, the article provides insights on how the methodology can be adapted to various settings or learner levels. So this was done very well. And the reviewer's comment was the author has successfully highlighted the flexibility of the approach, making it applicable across various educational contexts, from young learners to adult students. This adaptability enhances the practical relevance of the methodology, allowing educators to tailor it to their specific needs. Okay, now the final section, reflections and insights. What are you evaluating here? Well, the author's reflections on the implementation process, including what worked, what didn't work, and how the methodology improved learning outcomes, student engagement, or confidence, and they're presented logically. So some questions here that you can ask yourself is, does the article provide meaningful reflections on the teaching process? Does it document how the methodology improved learning outcomes, engagement, or confidence? Are the conclusions well supported by the author's observations and student feedback? And an example of poor feedback would be the reflections are not convincing. So let's take a look at some examples of excellent feedback. For the first section here, the article includes the author's reflections on the implementation process, including what worked well and what could be improved. So that was partially fulfilled. And the reviewer's comment was the reflections could be expanded. While the author mentions what worked, it would be helpful to include more detailed examples of student engagement and specific feedback from learners to support those observations. Okay, the next section, there is clear documentation of how the methodology improved learning outcomes, student engagement, and or confidence. Okay, that was poorly done, very poorly done. And the comment would be the article could benefit from a deeper discussion of the challenges encountered during implementation, providing insights on what didn't work and how the methodology could be improved in future iterations would add value. Okay, and finally, the conclusions flow forth logically and are significant and well supported by the practitioner observations and, let's say, by the practitioner's observations and students' feedback. So here, very well done. And the comment is the conclusions are well drawn and logically flow from the reflections and observations presented. The author's insights are backed by clear evidence from both practitioner observation and student feedback, making the conclusions both relevant and meaningful. Okay, now getting to the final part of the review. In this final section here, we would like you to include your remarks to other changes, remarks or changes to be done to the paper. So this here is the most important part because it's especially helpful for the author to make the best possible manuscript. And by providing examples, clear examples from the paper and from the sections that require improvement. Also, feel free to add as many lines as necessary. In the past, I've seen this section go on for, up to 3/4 to 1 to 1.5 to 2 even A4 pages of quotes from the paper. So please, if you could quote the page number, the paragraph, and give as well a specific quote from the paper. That really, really helps the author to pinpoint exactly where they need to look and either add detail or fix something. Okay. And then here, please provide some kind of actionable suggestions as to how the author can improve their manuscript. And again, remember, from the rubric, please provide your comments in order, in chronological order through the paper, okay, from start to finish of the paper. Now, finally, comments to the editorial team. Here, if there are any parts of the paper that you feel you might not have enough knowledge or experience, you don't have confidence reviewing, please include your comments to the editor here. So, for example, for the practice-based papers, the author, if the author introduces Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, I think pretty much everyone will be quite confident because they know very well about Lev Vygotsky's ZPD. But let's say the author introduces a more obscure framework, like let's say cognitive load theory, and you're not quite sure about how to assess that theoretical framework, then please feel free to write a comment here, and the editorial team will come to your rescue, and we will help out with that. Okay, well, I think that's about it for this video session. So basically, once again, I want to offer my great thank you to all of the reviewers for your valuable contributions to this review process. And again, by offering your expertise and your constructive feedback, you are really helping to maintain the high standards of the PanSIG journal. And you're also ensuring that the articles published are of both practical and academic benefit to educators worldwide. So once again, remember, after you have completed your review form, go back and cross-check the form using the rubric. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us, and have a great day. Bye-bye.